Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, but more specifically, we're going to talk about the Bitcoin dominance. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. We do have several different tiers available, including a free one. Make sure you guys check that out. Links in the description below. Let's go ahead and jump in. So, as always, it is everyone's favorite, or maybe least favorite, video series where we spend a lot of time just simply talking about the Bitcoin dominance and likely outcomes. And I will do my best during this video to communicate why the dominance is a worthwhile metric to follow, at least in my opinion. All right. You might argue, well, it's not like the dominance specifically can be traded, so what's the point of talking about it so much? But I do think it provides a lot of insight into the cryptoverse that is worthwhile to follow, especially when you think about alt Bitcoin pairs. So the first thing I want to do is talk about the dominance when we include stablecoins. All right, and then we're going to switch over to excluding stablecoins, look at some alt Bitcoin valuations, and just go from there. So when you include stablecoins, the dominance has sort of just been in this channel for about a year and a half now. And I know a lot of people just think I'm always bullish on the Bitcoin dominance. That's not actually true. I mean, back over here, we talked about, the Ethereum tsunami coming, right? Remember the end of December, back in December of 2020, and the idea that alts should really break out on their Bitcoin pairs. We normally see that after Bitcoin goes parabolic, and this time was no different, right? Same thing that tends to play out after you see a parabolic move by Bitcoin. But since then, the dominance has actually just sort of been in this channel for quite some time. What's interesting, we recently spoke about a golden cross on Bitcoin's daily time frame. We spoke about a weekly death cross, which Bitcoin just had on its USD pair. But interestingly enough, the dominance itself has had a golden cross, right? If you look at the 50-day and the 200-day SMA, recently had a golden cross. We had a golden cross back over here as well in March, and then we ultimately saw a rally on the dominance all the way up to around 48, 49%. However, that rally was not meant to be the one to sustain us to much higher levels on the dominance, as we had the Ethereum merge and so on and so forth, sort of let it back down. But you can see that the dominance has slowly started to climb higher again. And recently, one of the things you might look for in this climb is that it's been holding support on its 50-day SMA. So the 50-day SMA of the Bitcoin dominance, including stablecoins, is right around 43%. And so it's currently sitting around 43.81%. Now, I've been very vocal that the dominance should continue to go much higher. And one of the reasons why I think a lot of people don't think this is the case when you include stablecoins is because the stablecoin market has become such a large part of the cryptoverse. But the counterpoint, of course, is, well, what happens if regulations hit the stablecoin market like we're starting to see? And therefore, you could see some of the stablecoin market, at least some of the stablecoin market cap, shrink some if regulations were to sort of take hold over the stablecoin market for a while. So either way, I do think you're going to see the dominance of Bitcoin head higher, even when you include stablecoins, not only because you might see some people get spooked by the stablecoin market, but people who do have stablecoins simply might want to buy Bitcoin, not because they're scared of the stablecoin market, but maybe they just think that Bitcoin is worthwhile to buy the closer we get to the halving, or say, the closer we get to a theoretical or a future Fed pivot, which is still likely a little ways away. But regardless, you can see that the dominance has been slowly moving higher, continuing sort of hold support here on that 50-day SMA, and then sort of slowly bouncing up. And ideally, this is a more sustained way to move up than this over here, right? This over here is just sort of straight up, and then we came straight back down. This time, what's going on, right? We're hitting a low, going up, putting in a higher low, going back up, putting in a higher low, going back up, putting in a higher low. And so you could argue this is more of a sustained way for the dominance to ultimately head much higher. Now, of course, we can go look at this on the weekly time frame as well. And when you look at it on the weekly time frame, here's the 50-week SMA. You can see that it's sort of just been going sideways, but it's starting to curl back up, maybe just a little bit. You might have to squint your eyes, of course, but starting to curl a little back up to the upside. If you actually look at where the bull market support band is on the Bitcoin dominance, it's currently ranging from around 41.9% to around 42.41%. So yeah, we could still maybe go down to that level if you see sort of another hurrah by the altcoin market, but I am still sitting very much in the bullish on the Bitcoin dominance camp. And it sort of leads into the question, well, why do we talk so much about the dominance? It's not something that you can go specifically trade, right? It's not like you can say, oh, I'll take one Bitcoin dominance, thank you very much. But the point is to understand your risk-adjusted returns, right? When navigating the cryptoverse, right? What is your risk-adjusted return? And I mean, you can look at the Sharpe ratio, you can look at the Sortino ratio, and et cetera. But you can also sort of just do an analysis on do you think the dominance is going to head higher of what I think, what most people would agree is the safest asset in crypto, and that's Bitcoin, right? It's not going to be subject to the same regulation risk that you're going to see the rest of the cryptoverse at least get somewhat subjected to. Furthermore, it's the number one by market cap. It has the longest history here out of all the cryptocurrencies, and it's been number one, and it's never relinquished that position. And so when you think about your risk-adjusted returns, if you think that the number one crypto is going to take market share over a certain period of time, then for me, as a fairly risk-averse investor, as many of you know, I look at it and say, well, why would I want to put a lot of money into the altcoin market when I think the dominance of Bitcoin is going to go higher, right? I mean, like, what's the point? If I feel compelled that the dominance is going to go higher, then why would I spend too much time thinking about the altcoin market? Because even if the altcoin market goes up, if the dominance of Bitcoin is going higher, there's a good chance Bitcoin's outperforming those altcoins. And if Bitcoin goes lower, then what happens to the altcoin market, right? You get the altcoin reckoning, and they just completely wrecked. Furthermore, one thing to consider is, for the people that say, well, if you're distinctly in the camp that the dominant or the bottom is in for Bitcoin, and there's you don't really give any credence to any other type of thing. Remember, the dominance went up in 2019 as well, right? And then again over here in 2020 during that Bitcoin bull run. So don't mistake a theoretical discussion as to whether the bottom is in or not as a reason that the Bitcoin dominance is not going to go up. I mean, history shows us that, in fact, it still likely will go up. Now, I want to sort of segue here into what I would consider to be, and I've communicated several times, to be a more important way to measure the dominance. And of course, that's through looking through the lens of without stablecoins. Okay, so this is what it looks like without stablecoins, and this is arguably a much more important way to look at it. And you might say, well, is it rationalizing the fact that the dominance, including stablecoins, has not gone up as much as I thought it would at this point? Maybe a little bit, right? Maybe a little bit. But with that said, the purpose of the Bitcoin dominance has always been to help us understand the relative performance of the altcoin market, not to say, okay, well, how much is this in stablecoins? Because if you're going to include stablecoins, you could also say, well, why don't you include all the cash just sitting on the sidelines waiting to buy crypto? So I think by excluding stablecoins, it does give us a glimpse into the general trend within the altcoin market with respect to Bitcoin. And you can see, ever since May of 2021, the dominance continues to put in higher lows, right? And you zoom in over here, right? September of 2022, we put out a video back in August saying we think the dominance is going to see some type of a major bottom in September. And you can see really since September, it's been slowly moving higher. Now, I would agree that it's more fun watching paint dry than watching the Bitcoin dominance go higher just because of how slow it is. But the point is, and it's a cold reality to accept for a lot of people, and it's something I've had to accept myself in prior cycles, is that the altcoin market can just slowly bleed back to Bitcoin. I mean, it's just what we see happen time and time again. You might say, well, why? All these crypto projects, crypto is not the same as it was back in 2017, or it's not the same as it was back in 2013. So why should the altcoin market bleed back to Bitcoin? Well, listen, I mean, there are some improvements in the altcoin market, I will say that, but there's also been improvements in Bitcoin where we've never seen this type of institutional interest in Bitcoin. So yes, maybe there's some improvements in the altcoin market, but that's also pretending like there hasn't been any changes in Bitcoin's outlook as well, where 10 years ago or maybe 5 years ago, it's not like we had all these major banks talking about including Bitcoin and their clients wanting Bitcoin, right? That wasn't really a thing. Now it is. So yes, there's been some developments in the altcoin space. That's not to say that Bitcoin hasn't seen its own type of progression and its own adoption cycle. Furthermore, the other cold hard truth that I think is difficult for a lot of people to accept, and I'm just going to say it, right? 99.9% of the altcoin market is a scam, right? I mean, that's just right. It just is what it is. It's not all altcoins. And you might say, well, is it 99.9% kind of high? When you're looking at an asset class that has like, I don't know, what, 10,000 altcoins, most of them are literally just copycat code from other projects, right? It's just a copy. You go to this other project, you copy the code, you fork it, and you say, oh, look at my shiny new altcoin, right? But a lot of them are money grabs or cash grabs. And what happens is the teams will, they'll raise money and then eventually they just sort of disappear into the cryptoverse. Why? Because they already got their money, right? They get their money and run. Try not to fall for these things. I'm not saying there's no useful projects out there. Okay. And I know a lot of people say I'm a Bitcoin maxi. I was clear at the beginning of 2022 that I'm not a maxi, but I'm putting my maxi hat on for a while. When you go into a bear market and a recovery year, that's just the time to put on a maxi hat, in my opinion, because, when you put on your maxi hat, you're basically saying, look, maybe there's some validity to some of these altcoins, but at least for the time being, Bitcoin makes more sense from a risk-adjusted returns point of view. Okay, and that's what we're really after. It's not to say that altcoins can't go up. It's just to say, a lot of them are going to continue to bleed back against Bitcoin for months to come. And some of them are just going to be macro bleeders. Forget oscillators. Some of them are not oscillators. Some of them just bleed forever back to Bitcoin. Why? Why do you think, right? What happens next cycle? You're going to have new shiny altcoins that people are going to like. The altcoins that you liked back in 2021 or, 2017, right? People from 2017 can tell you, there's altcoins back then that were just a relic of a past cycle in 2021. No one cared about them. In the same way, in a future bull market, a lot of people aren't going to care about the coins from 2021, right? They're just going to be a relic from a prior cycle. And you're going to be, the OG investor that's going to be saying, oh, wow, no one cares about this altcoin anymore. Why not? Because there's been some massive new development in crypto that's now being capitalized on, and no one cares about these relics anymore. So you have to be careful with the altcoin market because so many of them come and go, right? They come and then they just disappear into the cryptoverse and you never really hear about them again. There are a few that have stood the test of time. And I've been open about that for a long time, right? A few have stood the test of time. And the first thing to look for is which altcoins have put in new highs more than one cycle, right? Bitcoin has always put in a new high every single cycle. And I mean, that's not to say that it always will, but Ethereum has, and there's been some altcoins that have as well. So look to that. If you're finding some coins that, put in a macro high in 2017 and then put in a much lower high in 2021, that's not heading in the right direction, right? It's just simply not heading in the right direction. So you have to consider that when thinking about the altcoin market. So going back to this, the dominance of Bitcoin, excluding stables, is now at 48.56%. Now, when you include stables, again, it's only at 43.8%. So there is a bit of a difference there. But it's important to distinguish why we follow this, right? It's to say, if you only look at this, you might be under the sort of the false assumption that all these altcoins have held up relatively well against Bitcoin, when that's not actually the case. When you look at it excluding stablecoins, again, higher lows for a long time. People don't like it sometimes when I point this out, but in reality, Bitcoin dominance excluding stables has been putting in higher lows since January 2018. So to the people that are in the "this time is different" camp, I've said this before, and it's kind of surprising to me too, if I'm being honest, right? It's kind of surprising to me too, because if you would have asked me back in 2021, I would have thought that the dominance was going to go lower. But by the end of 2021, when it hadn't happened, I basically just had to say, nope, it's not going to go any lower, right? It's time for us to start going back up. The altcoin market had its chance, and it wasn't able to put in a new low on the dominance. It just simply was unable to. And even when you include stablecoins, right, it was simply unable to put in a new low. So despite all the VC money, despite all the NFTs, despite everything, right, despite all of that, we still saw the dominance not go as low as it was in 2018. So, I mean, that is some relative strength by Bitcoin that I think might go often missed by a lot of people, is because they just look at what's happened recently. But in the context of history, the fact that the dominance couldn't even go below where it was in 2018, despite all this new money that came in, is very telling that Bitcoin actually is a lot stronger than I think people are giving it credit for, right? Now, why does this give us sort of a false since why could this give some people a false sense of security on the altcoin market? Well, they look at it and say, well, the dominance is really low, so that means the altcoin market has held up well. Now, first of all, before we get too far into this, let me point out that Ethereum has held up better than I thought it would at this point. But it doesn't mean it's going to forever. It's been sort of riding this trend line for a long time, and I still am of the opinion that it's going to eventually break to the downside. I could be wrong, right? And if I am, I'll hold my hand up high. I mean, it's not like I can hide from it. The receipts are all there. We've been calling for it forever. But if this breaks down, which I think it's going to eventually do, there's only one way for the dominance to go, right? And that's up a lot. So yes, I understand the Ethereum Bitcoin valuation has been holding up relatively well. But let's take a look at some of the altcoin market, right? Like, let's take a look at Solana, because this is a textbook way for people to lose their money in the cryptoverse, in a bear market / recovery phase for Bitcoin, right? Look at this. Every time Solana's Bitcoin valuation is put in a low, that low has acted as resistance after the next dump, right? So put in a low, pop back up to the bull market support band, get rejected, go put in a new low. Then this low bounces back up to the same level that it bounced up to before, but now it's resistance. Gets rejected by it, right? That wick rejected by where it previously held support, then continued sustained rejection by the bull market support band or bear market resistance band, if you prefer, followed by a new low, right? And then guess what? We bounce back up. Where do we bounce back up to? The bear market resistance band, which also corresponded to the prior low. So what happens? You keep getting these dumps. You keep getting people throwing their money into these altcoins because they're getting all these crazy rallies off the low, and people are saying, oh, who missed the dip? But the reality of the situation is that you're now over a year, 15 months into this, and Solana Bitcoin is down 79 to 80% against Bitcoin, and the people that bought it at the top are celebrating because it had a recent pump. You can get lost in this. I don't say this to be cynical. I say it because I myself have fallen into this trap so many times in the altcoin market. You celebrate every single pump. Look, Solana Bitcoin had a pump here, 50% pump. Everyone got excited. Here, 84% pump. Here, 146% pump. It doesn't mean a thing, right? I mean, maybe it means something if you cherry pick, grabbed the wick down here, and maybe you bought right there and ignored everything else. But the reality is it's still just been bleeding against Bitcoin. And so once upon a time, a 40,000 Satoshi Solana was celebrated. And then once upon a time, it was a 30,000 Satoshi Solana. And then it was a 20,000. And then now, you celebrate a 10,000 Satoshi. Well, what happens later on this year if it breaks down below this trend line and goes down to, say, a few thousand Satoshis, like 5,000 or 6,000? So you have to be careful, right? And I'm not saying that it has to bleed forever. It at some point it'll probably break out into sort of more of a sideways range, but this is how you can lose your money in the cryptoverse. Now, at this point, I mean, I'm not providing, of course, any financial advice. I'm not trying to do anything like that, but I've been warning about the altcoin reckoning on all Bitcoin pairs forever. So, at this point, we're so far into it, it's not going to be the same as if you had sort of paid attention to this back over a year ago. So I don't really know how much more downside it has, but I will say this. A lot of altcoins will bottom well after Bitcoin does, right? So like if we look back to 2019, a lot of altcoins on their Bitcoin pairs bottomed way after Bitcoin USD bottomed. And so you could argue that even if Solana's bottomed on its USD pair, which is a big if, right? It still probably hasn't on its Bitcoin pair. And so then you'll likely see another move down later on. And then maybe eventually it'll finally break out of this range, right? So let's pick on a different altcoin, because it's easy for me to pick on Solana, right? It's not one I've really spoken a lot about on my channel. So let's pick on one I have, and I do this to keep myself honest, but I also do it to show you that you have to remain objective. And I've spoken about Cardano many times, but I've also been very vocal over the last year that you're also likely going to see the ADA Bitcoin valuation bleed, And if you think that all altcoins bottom on their Bitcoin pairs after or before, by the time Bitcoin USD is bottomed, ADA didn't get that memo back in 2019. This here marked the Bitcoin USD bottom when ADA Bitcoin hit around 877 Satoshis, and it bounced back up. But ADA Bitcoin didn't bottom until Q3 of 2019 at around 400 Satoshis. That was about another 52% drop on its Bitcoin pair, despite the fact that Bitcoin USD had already bottomed. It still lost another 50%, right? So this is how the altcoin market gets you, right? You get lulled into a false sense of security, right? Thinking that, oh, we finally pumped. Everyone throws their money in again at the same resistance level they've been throwing it into for the last year, only for it eventually to resolve to the downside, right? And we've seen that with many different cryptocurrencies. We're seeing it with Solana. We're seeing it with Cardano. You could take a look at a lot of these different cryptocurrencies. I'm sure you'll probably see something similar with Avalanche, right? Yeah, so like Avalanche has been also slowly bleeding, although recently it has put in a slightly higher low, but this is also a lower high as well. I think these are often sort of continuation patterns, so I wouldn't be surprised if this ultimately resolved to the downside. And then I think Polkadot, Dot Bitcoin, has just been putting it. Look at this. I mean, it's just it's just a series of lower highs. And again, it's easy for everyone to get excited every time it rallies on up to the bear market resistance band. But once upon a time, it was exciting because it was at 7,000 Satoshis, and then it was because it was at 4,000, and then it was because it was at 3,000, and now it's because it's a little less than 3,000. The altcoin market has a way of just slowly bleeding back to Bitcoin during this stage of the market cycle. It's nothing personal against the altcoin market. It's just the way it is. Now, there are some altcoins that have done relatively well. And as I've mentioned, I don't really think of Ethereum as an altcoin, but it has held its own. The problem is, the problem with this, though, is I know a lot of people might look at this and say, well, Ethereum's held its own, meaning the dominance is never going to go up. What if it just means the grand finale hasn't happened yet? Because it hasn't, because I've said before, by the end of all of this, even the giants will fall. And I still think we're waiting on the Ether Bitcoin valuation to make the plunge into the depths of the cryptoverse for us to see that final move by the dominance screaming to the upside is my general expectation. Now, I will say, because a lot of people have asked, well, how does this all relate to sort of Bitcoin USD? And the thing about that is, you have two different schools of thought here, right? Let's just go through them. You have one school of thought that says we're sort of in this phase. This is the bear thesis, that the dominance is going up because Bitcoin pumps and then it comes right back down. Well, it pumped and it's starting to come back down again. So that's the bear thesis. The bull thesis is that we're right here. And so the dominance is going higher, right? What do you get in either scenario? What happened in both scenarios? Take a look. You overlay the Bitcoin dominance on both scenarios. What happened? Dominance went up in 2018 when it was the bear scenario, and it went up in 2019 when it was the bull scenario. So what does that mean, right? What it means to me is simply this, right? It doesn't matter if it's the bull or the bear scenario. It's the dominance is likely going to go up either way. So for me, what it means is any exposure to the cryptoverse should mostly just be limited to Bitcoin, because I still think the dominance is going to climb higher. My guess is that we're neither here. I'm guessing we're neither here nor here. You might say, well, why can't you just pick, right? It's completely different times, right? I mean, you can't just compare it to any specific place and say it has to play out the same way. It's not like you could go find a place exactly like these two in the prior history and say that it played out the exact same way. So why should we expect it to this time? And it might play out a completely different way. We talked about the worst case scenario for Bitcoin, right? And that's sort of following the NASDAQ. If you're not familiar with that story, it's sort of the 77% drawdown, followed by a 60% rally to the 50-week, right? Which is basically what we have right now. The reason why we mentioned that is because, again, if you go look at what the NASDAQ did back in the dot-com crash, it was a 77% drawdown followed by a 60% rally of the 50-week. So if that plays out, then that means, Bitcoin will eventually roll back over and head to the downside. But the point of all of this is to say, Bitcoin's dominance is likely going to continue much higher, not only because there's regulation FUD that won't hit Bitcoin in the same way that's going to hit the altcoin market, but you also have the stablecoin market that is now potentially getting somewhat jittery. We don't really know how that's going to play out. And so because of all of this, the dominance, I think, is still poised to go much higher, whether you include stablecoins or you don't, right? It's the argument, whether you include them or not. If you want to include them, I think we're going to still see a massive break to the upside. If you want to exclude them, same thing. right? So either way, you take a moving average of this, like say like a 30-day SMA, you can see as well, sort of slowly building out a base here. Put like a 50-day or a 90-day, right? Slowly building out a base. And again, it's more interesting watching paint dry, I'm sure, but this is something that we've followed for a long time, and I think you are seeing it sort of play out here in real time. So again, if you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe, give the video a thumbs up. We again do have Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. See you guys next time. Bye.